Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes, and welcome to the Books I Should Have Read a Long Time Ago, desultorily chosen based on how I felt at the time series. So, as I've said before, this is very much not going to be books that are, great literature that one should read. This is about, there are things that you should do, as with the first couple where, with the Lord of the Rings series, where if you're going to be a fantasy buff like I am, you should really have read The Origin Point. Books that were given to me as gifts years ago. In this case, this book, A Play of Isaac, by Margaret Frazer, this is deliberately a spin-off of the Dame Frevisse series. I've read the whole Dame Frevisse series. So I should have, at minimum, tried the A Play of series because this is a spin-off. The player, that is actor Joliffe, who appears in several books in that series, Margaret Frazer wrote him his own series. And I should have read this. I should have read it. I didn't, and that's on me, but I should have. So here's the interesting thing about players. The actors in the medieval period are very, very different from what we think of today. Among other things, of course, women weren't allowed to be actors. This is something that didn't change until sometime, I think, in the 17th century, when some wit thought, why don't we have a woman be a woman on stage instead of a man pretending to be a woman? I mean, they still thought every actress was a whore up until, the 1950s and then some, but the point is that women were not to make a display of themselves like that, only men were. But the thing about being a player was that many of them, as Joliffe and the very, very small company, they are in fact a company of 3 men, 1 boy, and the boy's mother, who is kind of along and does all of the backstage stuff, the prep work, the making and fixing of costumes, and taking care of their props. She's, stage mistress, really. The thing is that you would have these troops, and they would just lead a peripatetic existence. They would travel everywhere. And as is pointed out in that second book, of the Dame Frevisse series, and as is pointed out in this one, as with other groups, such as the Roma, then called gypsies, the thing about groups like that is that they are automatically and always immediately under suspicion. Now, Joliffe is a naturally cat-curious kind of person. He, can't stop chewing these things over in his head immediately anyways, much like Frevisse can't. But he is also very concerned, as I said, because when you have a traveling group like the Roma, or like players, or like, any other group like that, they are immediately under suspicion because being strangers, of course, makes you suspicious because it's easy to point at a stranger and say, well, this is, the scary outsider. But the thing is that outsiders like that are scary because it's not merely that they're from far away and you don't know them as people, it's that you can't understand why anybody would do that. That these are people who can't understand why somebody would want to be on the road. They can't understand why somebody wouldn't want to have the regularity of the church being right there, the certainty of, this is where I'm going to sleep, and this is where my next meal is, and this is the Lord that I am beholden to, and. It makes them doubly suspicious because their entire life ambition motivations are opaque. And so it makes them even scarier. Players are particularly concerning because players are people who pretend to be somebody else. And in point of fact, there was a tradition at the time in the medieval period, and frankly, based on how some people are about actors these days, maybe we should revive it, that after a play, the player who had been the devil or a demon or something really, really bad in the play would go around to people in the audience afterwards to assure them that he's just a man like them, that he is a totally normal human being, he is not the devil, he is not an avatar of evil, he's just a guy. And Joliffe, who plays both angels and devils because he's very, very good at being slick, at being devilishly handsome, at being at projecting those sorts of smoothly metaphysical things that you would get with angels and demons, he tends to wind up playing those roles a lot. And so several times throughout this book, he has to sort of, as part of conversation, go out of his way to, in effect, disabuse people of his evilness. That, when they see that him having played an angel and everybody's sort of wowed and amazed, that he has to sort of, it's part of what you have to do as a player, is you have to explain to people, no, this is just me reciting lines. I am not the thing that I was pretending to be. But it's a confusing and concerning thing for a lot of people, which makes players scary. So when a dead body turns up just outside of the barn that their host was allowing them to stay in, and allow me to clarify, them being relegated to the barn is not some sort of a horrific thing. The fact is that the barn is warm, and it's dry, and it's a safe place, and they can keep all of their stuff there and not worry about it being stolen. And, it's the medieval period, and peasant lives were extremely uncomfortable, so being given a place like that is something that is actually a thing that they are intensely grateful for. But when a dead body shows up, Joliffe is, yes, he automatically starts chewing it over in his head because, it's part of his instinct to look into this stuff. But it's also almost a self-defense measure, a measure of, I have to make sure to prove that it wasn't us because we will be the first people that they will point fingers at if they have their way. Now, they're very, very lucky to get a crowner who is a rational human being, because Master Montfort from the Dame Frevisse novels is not a rational human being. So and the fact is, being a crowner is, kind of like being a detective inspector. Your job is to investigate every unnatural death. So anytime that there is a sudden death that looks like it could be, in theory, murder, as opposed to, dying quietly in your sleep or dying after a long illness, you call in the crowner in the same way that you call in the police anytime that there is an unexpected death that could, in theory, have been a murder, that they get called in to investigate in order to ensure that there wasn't, at least an immediately visible murder happening. Anyways. So the big plot line in this is that they've been called to perform at a Corpus Christi celebration, and that there's going to be a whole bunch of players, that there's going to be basically a whole whack of companies, and each of them is performing a different play that you start, and it's sort of telling the whole story of the Bible up to Christ's crucifixion. And so you have somebody who's doing a play of the Garden of Eden, and players who are doing interval things, and the play that they're doing for this is Abraham and Isaac, which is sort of, part of their thing. And so they're doing their other play that they've put it on in the marketplace, and a young man who is clearly being depicted as having something like Down syndrome, that he's got some kind of serious cognitive disability along with some serious physical issues, that he's super delighted by the play and super eager, and he's wants to take them home with him. And his family is wealthy enough that they can, in fact, offer the opportunity for these players to come and stay effectively at their home for a week during the lead up to the Corpus Christi, and they do a play for them. They are, after all, expecting to a Lord Lovell and his lady to be showing up for events, and so if they're going to have an actual lord there, then having a company of players to, provide some entertainment along the way would be very good. So in exchange for a safe place to stay and the opportunity to eat with the rest of the household servants, they'll put on a play. And so this is a fantastic deal for them. They are not going to have to find some place to stay. They're not going to have to pay for some place to stay. Somebody else will be providing them meals. No, they're not going to be paid for it, but they are going to be paid in room and board. And so it's an incredibly great opportunity for them to rest up, and so they accept. Along the way, you find out that the man who is their leader and also director, as well as being one of the actors, has a history with the head of this family. But Lewis, the guy with Down syndrome, is officially the heir to this particular estate, and Master Pentenny, who is running things, has not changed the heir from Lewis, who, having Down syndrome, having all of these issues, cannot run an estate and a business. He hasn't changed the heir to Lewis's brother, and everybody agrees that it's probably because as long as Lewis is the one who is the heir, then he needs a legal guardian, and the legal guardian gets to have control of things, and so Pentenny is not changing that. Anyways, there's a whole bunch of things in this, but what's most surprising about this is how little mystery there really is in this. This book is a lot of stage setting. I expect that the next book in the series would have more mystery, but there's a lot of time spent on developing the characters, on developing who Joliffe is, on developing the fact that Joliffe is not just a guy who fell in with a bunch of players. He's a former Oxford scholar. He was at university. He could have, if he had so chosen, had a degree and been in a cushy, safe teaching job. But as he says to his friend, who one of his friends recognizes him and they get to talking, that as he tells that old friend of his from Oxford, that my sense of humor, my sense of the ridiculous was such, I couldn't stay there, I couldn't keep it up. That basically, academics is an eminently serious thing, and if you're somebody who is just so endlessly inclined to poke fun at the over-serious, who is endlessly inclined to challenge people on their ideas, on their logic, it's not a very good place for people who are going to be challenging in the way that Joliffe would. And that's as true now as it was then. Academia is supposed to be a place for challenging ideas, but there are limits. And Joliffe is exactly the kind of person who would have pushed right past those limits and not cared. And he realized that and left and became a player. But that is considered to be the reasoning behind one of the great values that he gives them, which is rewriting plays for a very small company of 3 men and 1 child. I suppose I'm not going to bother talking about the actual mysteries because I'm basically at the end of my self-appointed time limit. So, yeah, this is fun. I will probably read the rest of the series and get back to you in the main series of my YouTube channel about that. So, that's everything, and I will see you all next week.